everybody. Thank you for joining us for another Conversations. I am Candie Zenon, author and life coach, and CEO, founder of Changing Seasons Life Coaching, where I help single moms strengthen their faith, family, and finances through one-on-one coaching, mentorship, solutions, of course, books, and live events. And I'm here this evening with Miss Robin Altland, and she's coming to share a bit of her story. How did she love through it? What did she learn from it? And how did she live after it? Welcome, Miss Robin. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Candie. It's always great to have a conversation about the lessons we've learned in life.
Yes, that is true. And I want to welcome you to the Conversations platform. Here we always try to help somebody just live just a little bit better, a little bit easier. So if you all would stay tuned for these announcements, we'll come back and hear more from Ms. Robin Altland. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Candie Zenon, author and life coach to single moms, and the CEO founder of Changing Seasons Life Coaching, where I help single moms strengthen their faith, family, and finances through one-on-one coaching, mentorships, books, solutions, of course, and live events. Well, I come on here just because I became a co-author with the Wake Up Winning No Matter What Volume 2. Yes, I'm just excited about that as you are. I became a co-author because I simply just wanted to serve the heart of God by encouraging the hearts of His people. Well, that's my reason. And if you would like to support us, purchase your copy today. The first 20 people who pre-order today will be acknowledged in the book, and we get to meet you at the December 2020 book launch. That's exciting, right? So I am, once again, Candie Zenon, author and life coach, and I want to encourage you to keep waking up winning. See you in December. Welcome back, Conversation family. We're here again with Miss Robin Altland, and we're talking about how to love through it, learn from it, and live after it. So, Miss Robin, tell us about who is Robin Altland.
Yeah, that's always an interesting question because you can define who you are by your life experiences, by your positions around you, by your relationships to other people. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I am a daughter of a pastor. I come from generations of ministers on both sides of my family. Both my mom and my dad were ministers. I have brothers and uncles and cousins and, nieces and nephews who are all in ministry. So I come from a strong ministry background. I happened to go in a different direction in my life professionally. I got involved in business very early and found it very exciting. And so I have spent the last, I hate to say this number, but almost 40 years now in the business world, working primarily in the area of professional development, learning and development, leadership development, and just a whole range of things in the business arena, building up both the individual and the leadership and culture change inside of organizations. So all of that is very much a part of my background and who I am. I'm very passionate about those things and pulling out the best and finding the right path for people to really be who they are, the best of who they are. But in addition to that, I've also been passionately and intensely involved in my local church. I'm involved with Life Center Ministries here in Dunwoody, Georgia, and have been working in the area of the ministry and the prophetic. Also very involved in our marketplace ministry, and have worked with a team to lead the marketplace ministry at Life Center as well. And we have a passion for people living their faith in the world and in the workplace, not just in the church environment. I'm a mom. I came to that late in life. I didn't get married until I was 40 years old. And through a miracle of God, became a mom 3 years later when I was told I would never be able to have kids.
Wow.
And so I am the mom of a very energetic 16-year-old typical teenage boy and working through all of that. My husband and I have been married this year will be 19 years. So that's a pretty good recap, I think.
That is beautiful. And everything that you said, I just love, love, love. You're encouraging to me because I have been single longer than I've been married, and I am looking to remarry. And I'll be praying on that journey next after this journey, I guess. But when you spoke about personal development and cultural definitions, and also leadership, that's all relatable now. That's all relative at this moment in time. And I am one that's always trying to better myself. How can I be a better version of myself than I was yesterday? And I'm glad you brought up your church, Life Center, because that's where I met you at. I don't know if you remember, but you had spoke a little snippet. You wasn't the speaker that night. Maybe you were the MC, or you came right before the primary speaker, and you said a little snippet of cellular trauma. And so while the whole church was worshiping, Candie had a whole nother agenda to tap you on the shoulder and say, "What was that you said?" Tell me more about that. So, and ever since then, you just held my attention. I have since been reading up on the topic, and just inviting others, as I always do. I love to share, I love to encourage through word, the spoken word and the written word. I invited others on this journey as well. I've been reading this book by Dr. Basel Kork, K-O-R-K, I believe. And it was said, The Body Keeps Score. That's the name of the book. It's also an audio book here on YouTube. The Body Keeps Score. That's a very good book to talk about trauma. But before I go off into that, but sticking with personal development, what is the word or phrase that you live by, that this is like your mantra for life?
I think it was something that we worked on many years ago at Life Center. It was something we called our personal purpose. And your personal purpose is really a phrase that captures kind of the core of who God made you to be. Okay. And there was a process that Dr. Mary Crum worked with those of us who went through that class with her and kind of went through that experience with her. And what she drew out of me and out of the people that were around me was a description of what they came to me for, of the things that people, when they engaged with me, it was what brought life to those interactions. And it went something like this. It was to provide a place for you to demonstrate courage so that your confidence will arise for life and transformation.
Okay.
And I think that phrase, probably more than anything, providing a place for people, making a way, opening a door for people to experience and demonstrate the courage that God has put inside of them. All of us, whether we believe it or not, really do have a core of courage, but that courage is usually linked to being and doing who God has made us to be. And if you can tap into, there's no better, a lot of times young people will use the phrase, we're in the zone. There's no better feel than walking and living out of who you know God made you to be. Okay. And for me, it is not only demonstrating courage in interactions and taking risks, which is kind of the typical way we think of that, but it's also encouraging or pulling courage out of and causing courage to rise up in other people. And it's done through helping people to build that confidence that's inside of them. And the confidence is anchored in, I'm on purpose. I'm doing what God called me to be. I'm doing what I was made and created to do. And there is an energy and an excitement and an achievement and a success that comes with that when you are uniquely being who God created you to be. And so for me, helping people find that place and helping people to discover and then live out of that place has been probably a core tenet even before I realized what was happening.
Wow. Now, was there ever a time that you had to find out that you had this courage inside of you that didn't know?
Good heavens, yes. You know, one of the things that Dr. Mary talked to us about is she said, sometimes what we do is we live at the effect of our purpose, which means our purpose has been turned against us by circumstances or by a distortion of who we think we are. And I think every one of us has found ourselves in a place where we are acting the opposite of who we know ourselves to be. And you know, there's a disappointment, and the enemy will use that cycle to kind of drive us down and kind of beat us down. And we sort of begin to beat up on ourselves about, oh, you know better than that. It's that shaming that comes, all of those things. You're not doing what you know to do. And just, you know, all the words that we use and sometimes other people use with us around that. And, you know, we've all had plenty of those circumstances. But I'll tell you what really began to cause me to become very clear about purpose was after my husband and I got married. He had been married before. He had not been a Christian at the time he and his wife were married. And so he'd been divorced about 9 years, and he was new to God. He was new to the Lord. And I had a lot of friends look at me like, you have got to be kidding. You've been a Christian almost your whole life, and you're walked in the ways of the Lord for so long. What are you doing marrying somebody who, you know, has barely been a Christian for a year? And it was one of those things where I absolutely had to really get with God and say, okay, God, you've got to show me if this really is you. You're going to have to really confirm this for me. And he did in some amazing ways, and that's a whole different story. But after our marriage, I began to realize that, you know, there wasn't two of us in our marriage, there were three of us. Because my husband's ex-wife was still very, very bitter and very torn from their relationship and very hurt from their relationship. And I noticed he lived out a lot of that anger and hurt as well. And it you know, he kept saying, this has nothing to do with you, but yet it was right in the middle of our relationship. And there were some really rough spots. And I, you know, many times I would say, you're going to need to leave the house when you have that conversation with her, because I don't want that anger and that vitriol coming into our home. And so I began to talk to him about being willing to forgive her and being willing to let go of the past. I said, we can't build a relationship and a future if that's not dealt with. And before we had ever gotten married, he had gone and asked and apologized to her for not being the husband that he needed to be, and so on. And so he kind of had done that, but the emotion was still very much there. And the bitterness was still very much there. And so I found myself, honestly, at times really despairing of the success of our relationship, because here I had waited so long in my life to get married, and now I'm facing a scenario where it's like, wait a minute, this is not the marriage that I thought I was going into. This was not what I bargained for, God. I have two wonderful stepkids, and at the time they were young teenagers, and they were very influenced by the anger and the bitterness going on. So here I was, the evil stepmom, and I was just found myself in the middle of a situation where I thought nobody could have told me this was what I was walking into.
Right.
Like, wait a minute, God, this was not what I bargained for.
Right.
And so as I began to talk to God about it, and God said, just have courage and love. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that sounds great. How do you actually do that when you have all this bitterness and this anger coming at you? And God said, my grace is sufficient. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, how do I get through now, though? And so I began to talk to God, and God began to give me, and I just had to say, God, you've got to give me a love for her. You've got to give me a love for their situation and a compassion for their situation. And so I began to pray, and I began to then talk to my husband. And I said, this is going to damage our life and our relationship if you don't deal with this. And he said, I get it, but I don't know how. And so he began to say, all right. I said, well, are you willing to let God change your heart? And he said, well, okay, I'm willing to be willing. And I said, okay, that's a place where God can start that.
Yes,
and
place.
Got to start somewhere, right? And so we began to pray, and when he began to say, you know what, I'm going to start praying for her. God, I believe God's told me to start praying for her, to pray blessings on her, to pray, to forgive as best I know how, but then to really try to bless her. And we began to find ways to be a blessing to her in the midst of some really very ugly circumstances. And within 18 months, she had actually reached out to me and said God had been dealing with her heart, and would I mentor her in the things of God? Wow. And would she mind if she came to church with us? And it began a healing process that today she's very much a part of our family life. We have holidays and celebrations together. The kids see the healing that has taken place. She and I are good friends, and my son views her as, an auntie in the family. Wow. So it really has been a testimony to how God, when you bring God into a situation, it really doesn't matter what history or conventional wisdom tells you can or can't happen. God can make it happen. And I look back and think it really took a courage of purpose, that I began to see her through God's eyes and began to live out my purpose for her, which is to help her confidence arise, to help her courage arise to face some things.
Nice. What did you see her as?
Well, the first thing God showed me were really some amazing qualities that he had put inside of her. She's one of those people who can strike up a conversation with anybody. She has a heart of evangelism and really has compassion for people. And so, and yes, there were hurts, and yes, she has challenges and things that she has to struggle with. But when I began to see her for what God had made her to be, and then just began to remind her of that when she got off purpose, or when she was feeling discouraged, or, when she wasn't acting out of that purpose, I would remind her, hey, that's not who God's made you to be. Come on. And prayed with her and warred with her and cried with her when we needed to. It really, when you begin to see somebody through God's eyes, it's not that it becomes a Pollyannish thing. You don't see their flaws. You don't see any of the bad. God sees all of that in us, but he sees who we were made to be, and he sees what's getting in the way of that. And he always makes a way to go through those barriers for us to begin to live out of who we really are made to be. And that, to me, it takes courage to face your flaws. It takes courage to be willing to let go of preconceived ideas about situations. it takes courage to forgive,
Mhm.
and to be willing to let go of past hurts.
Mhm.
But all of those things are necessary for you to really become who God made you to be.
Mhm. Well, now, was there any many lessons along this life journey that brought you to this big test? Because that took a whole lot of courage, that took a whole lot of love, and a whole lot of selflessness. Because, like you said, you came into your marriage at age 40, and people have lived a lot of life by age 40, right? So you can expect maybe children, maybe an ex there, and maybe some family members that person's responsible for, aging parents or something. So you can't come in really looking for a no compete clause. Because
Doesn't exist.
what prepared you for this big test?
Well, I think the number one thing, I grew up in the church. I grew
Okay.
up in a Christian family,
Uh-huh.
um, but I also grew up very angry at the
Uh-huh.
church.
Okay.
Um, my dad was the pastor, and sometimes that meant we were the last priority on the list. The
Okay.
church always came first. Everybody else's problems always came first. There was always someone that was a higher priority at times, it felt like. And of course, you
Mhm.
see that through the eyes of a kid.
Right.
Um, but it felt like we were always the lowest priority.
Okay.
And so I began to be very angry.
Mhm.
And of course, it was always, God, you did this. And so I had probably a good 10 years where I ran from God, and I ran from God's purpose in my life, and made some really big mistakes. And really, looking back as an adult, I still cringe at what I put my parents through, and the embarrassment and the shame that they must have dealt with their daughter just running amok.
Mhm.
And really turning her back on everything that they held dear.
Mhm.
And it was wonderful to see, again, looking back, how my parents, their patience, their love, their unconditional love for me, didn't condemn, prayed me through it, got me through it. And I guess by the time I hit 40 years old, I had made enough bonehead mistakes that there was a lot of humility that went with that.
Mhm.
And, I learned early on that, be careful how you point the finger at somebody else, because when you start judging somebody else for something, it is a setup, because you will end up doing that and more,
Mhm.
and that and worse.
Mhm.
And so I guess I had been given a pretty hefty dose of humility at that point,
Mhm.
and realized that I had no right to point a finger, to call judgment. Um, and I certainly hadn't gone through the kind of trauma that I had seen other people going through. God had spared me a lot of that in spite of my mistakes.
Mhm.
And I think that, more than anything else, uh, caused me to enter into things with more than a little bit of humility,
Mhm.
that said, look, but for the grace of God, that would be me and a lot worse.
That is beautiful. That's a true testament that nothing is wasted. And I hear a lot of encouragement for a lot of people who are going through raising teenagers that's doing opposite of what they've been teaching them. And we keep hearing that scripture come back to us, train them up in the way they should go. But we don't see them going that way, but we have to give them time to walk out the journey that God has for them, because along the way, they would learn empathy, compassion, sympathy, humility, love, forgiveness. So, however the route that God needs them to take, that to get the 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 characteristic, to build the characteristic He needs for them to have in their purpose, we have to allow them that freedom to go their journey and trust God. And I was talking about that early this morning trusting and believing. A lot of things are just on the other side of trusting and believing, trusting and believing. And if we can just do that. So I love the fact that you shared that with us today. And just share with us, what is the one thing that you wish that everybody would know that would make their life easier?
Oh, wow. The one thing. I guess I could sum it up in God is bigger than you think he is. You're more important to him than you think you are. And there is so much more inside of you than you realize. And it's only going to be seen when you give him the opportunity to draw it out of you. And you have to trust, as you said, that whatever circumstance God has you facing, there is a nugget that God will dig out of you, or a deposit that God will put in you through whatever you're going through, whether it is a job loss, a failure, a relational challenge, whatever it is. If you keep coming back to not God, why me, but God, what are you doing in me?
Wow.
And if you use that as the basis for your conversations with God, they're a lot richer and a lot more enlightening. And usually the situation is a lot shorter than what it would have to be otherwise, because there's always a purpose that God's working on us for an eternal outcome. It's not just the here and now. We're so, yeah, but God, I don't see it right now, or I'm not seeing things change yet. And when we get to that place of such frustration, you have to be confident in the fact that God's looking at the long haul. He's looking at the long term. Yes, he wants to bless you now, but not at the expense of your eternal destiny. And he does have a purpose for what you're dealing with and what you're going through. And if you give him the opportunity, he will cultivate and deposit that in you. And then it becomes something that you can share out of and that you can turn and begin to give out of.
That is so true. That is a definite tweet. Not why me, but God, what are you doing in me? I love that. I wrote a book called Hope for a Rainy Day, Encouragement for the Single Mother. And I am diarying my story of how I came to Georgia. I came to Georgia via hurricane, not plane, train, but a hurricane. It was actually, they told us to evacuate, prepare for 5 days. But by the 6th day, I was declared homeless. And right now, my family is going through another hurricane that has changed the trajectory of their lives, called Hurricane Laura. But I was blessed to come to Georgia because I was able to provide for my family in a way that I knew I could not in Louisiana. And so you never know what God is doing in you and preparing you. And in that midst of that storm, he taught me how to transition with looking for him in every situation. Complete strangers were made friends. We never went without. We always had food, shelter, transportation. We always was met with loving open arms. And to me, that was new because I am a giver by nature. So to be on the other end and receive, I didn't know how much humility I needed just to receive and say thank you and allow someone to give to me at this point in time. But now I can go back and I can tell my people how to prepare to transition in the midst of emergency, how to be prepared before the emergency comes, because famine is only famine when you're not prepared. So how to have an emergency fund, how to have an escape plan, how to be prepared in the midst of emergency, what to take to transition into a new place. So I really feel that I went through that in order to reach back and teach others. And everything I learn, I teach. Everything I learn, I teach. And I really love what you just said. Why, not why me, but what are you doing in me? So now I know when I go through something, just go through, get to the other side and look back and see what I learned from that experience, extract what I need to grow, and share all the rest.
You have to always remember that a testimony doesn't come without the test.
Yes.
And it's okay to grieve if you lose things. It's okay to be angry appropriately. It's okay to do what you have to do to manage the emotional aspect of what you're dealing with. And, you know, you mentioned the cellular trauma. It's okay to get healing for trauma that can reside and sit in our bodies in different places. And end up, you know, in fact, if you don't give a healthy outlet for those emotions, they will find a place in your body to begin to express themselves. And, and it's not always in a place where you want it to be. And so there is wisdom, and doctors will even tell you that is, you know, 90-something% of the issues that they deal with have their root in stress and trauma. And so those things are there, they're very real. And God doesn't intend for you to just say, oh, la, 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 everything's wonderful, it'll all be great. Because you do have to deal with the immediacy of those feelings. But if you have a forward place to go with it, if you know that there is a path through this, there's a purpose and there's a path through it, then your brain begins to think and approach it very differently. You'll have to forgive me, my cat loves to be a part. This is Wiggy, and he loves to be a part of every conversation, especially on video.
Hi, Wiggy.
But absolutely, you know, that if you give yourself permission to look forward, then you don't get stuck in the emotions and the trauma of right now. It doesn't mean you don't feel them, but it means you don't get stuck there.
Yes, absolutely. So, and when you spoke of emotions, energy in motion, we have to let it up and out of us, because like you said, it'll find a place to go in our bodies. And I heard one person say that if it doesn't weep out of your eyes, it'll weep in your organs. And whatever dis-ease happens in the emotions, it starts to disease the body. So, and that's what we don't want, that dis-ease, that disruption that occurs in our organs. So we have to learn to address the trauma, give it a name, identify it, learn to release it, whether it's journaling, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's counsel, seeking psychiatrists or psychologists and professionals to help you look back. It's okay, look back. Identify what it is. What was it? Learn to release it, let it go from all mind, body, and spirit. And then identify where you are and create a plan to where you desire to go, because you want to keep moving forward in that purpose that Miss Robin is talking about. Because God has said in Jeremiah 29:11, we all have a purpose. He has a plan for us, not to harm us. And what is that harm? That stress, that worry, that trauma, those events that we live each and every day that doesn't give us that abundance of life. And your audience awaits you, whatever that purpose is. If it's to sing before presidents, if it's to write the bestseller, if it's to create an invention that's going to change the world, we await you. We await you. But you can't live out that purpose if you're still living in a past. Your past have no place in your present. So I am so happy, Miss Robin, that you joined me this evening. I thank you. Anything else that you would like to share with the ConverSAGEtion's audience?
Yeah, let me just say this, be kind to yourself.
That's good.
You know, I think so many times we are so hard on ourselves. We tend to beat ourselves up a lot. And Honestly, if we ever had exposed the kind of self-talk that we give to ourselves, if anybody else was ever saying that to us, it would be considered abuse. And I think we get away with it because it's all internal, and we don't ever let that out. But the effect is the same. The trauma that we inflict on ourselves through beating ourselves up for things, not forgiving ourselves for mistakes, not being willing to let go of things that we didn't live up to who we thought we should be, or maybe even who our potential was. In the moment, that was where we were. And God has grace for us, and we need to have grace for ourselves and be willing to let that go.
That is so beautiful. Grace for ourselves. We forget that. We forget that so much, to have grace for ourselves. I think you just stepped on my toes a little bit.
Only because I was getting off of my own.
That was so beautiful. Well, once again, my name is Candie Zenon, and I'm thanking Ms. Robin Altland for joining us this evening. And hopefully we are helping you love through it, learn from it, and live after it. If you do us a favor, please join the Facebook page, Sage, the Season and the Singles, where we're taking the weightless journey, addressing the weight on the heart as well as what is on the scale. And I want to ask you to like, to share, and to subscribe, and get this message out to all that may be traumatized and have an opportunity now to live in a best abundant life. And have a great evening, and see you next Sunday, 5 p.m. Enjoy.